following podcast is recorded and produced by Emerge, a media creators co-op, in affiliation with the network at bicbp-radio.com.
Question: who is lying to you today? The media? Social media? Big business? Politicians? Actually, it's probably all of them. That led me to create this podcast named They're All Lying to Us. We do research and present findings and opinions on political, social, and cultural topics to inform our communities about what's really going on. You know, stuff that affects everyday American life. We also invite you to share your voice and help us recreate real-life interactions as they were had in the pre-digital era. I'm your host for these conversations. My name is Andy. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of They're All Lying to Us, or as we call it for shorthand, TALUS. Reminder, you can find us on the web at lyingtous.com. And you can also find our podcasts at Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and a video of our podcast, or videocast, I guess you might call it, at YouTube. At our YouTube site, look for They're All Lying to Us there, and you can find us. We're there. So today we are here on August 29th, 2024, and winding down summer for many. And if your household is anything like my household, we're dealing with a lot of COVID stuff. So that's going around too here as we wind out the summer. But it feels like the election stuff, in terms of what people are talking about, is front and center. So today I came up with kind of the idea was, there's been a lot of little back and forth about things going on between the two sides, the Democrats, Republicans, Harris, Trump, etc. And I thought I'd take a break from that to kind of revisit some thoughts on how did we get here? And a lot of that has to do with how did we end up that both sides look at the other one, whether Harris or Trump, as to whether or not the other one will be, if they win, it's like the end of America. It's like the last president, last president of the American experience, I guess. And on the extremes of both sides, I think everybody views the other side, to put it in all the political pundits and everybody else's terminology, as the existential threat to America. And some people with Trump will point to the January 6th. And for some, like for me, who's I'm a Democrat, but I may have expressed earlier that I'm not the best Democrat ever. I'm not certainly not on the far left. I'm much more to the center. And there's sometimes I don't like Democrats and the things that they do. So at one point a few years ago, I went to some Republican meetings. This was probably around 2017, and some of the Tea Party meeting. And I think they've changed their name or something like that, because the emails I get from them are different now. So I went to both, and I'm trying to figure out, what's kind of the thought process there. And I think that led me to kind of the theory of why the right and the Trump supporters believe that Kamala, or if Biden were elected, that it's the end of the America as you know it, or as they know it. And I think the perspective on it is, kind of not all in like what we talk about in this show, which is, there's two things that I think are going on in the broader universe, which are speedy and big. And speedy is everything that happens faster, and big are all the forces that kind of manipulate us and own us, whether it's corporate, government, or otherwise. And all these forces are kind of pushing us in these different directions. But that speedy part means we're changing a lot. And I struggle, I agree, I guess, to some extent, with those right-wingers who believe that, our country's changed a lot and it's a lot different. Because I look at my kids and the 25 years or 30 years between, me and my kids, and their lives are so much different than it was when I was a kid growing up in the 70s and the 80s. Still waiting to grow up in the 2020s, but when I did my physical growing up at that point. And it's a lot different. And if you look at some of these things, the right wing people looked at it and they saw kind of an America slipping away, the America that they knew slipping away, were, becoming black and browner. So there's kind of racial parts of it. We now have, we're less Christian than we once were. We're um, more globalist than America was, although I think for most of the people who are Americans now, I think we've been fairly global since World War II. But there was still that kind of thought of being a little more isolationist, and we're not much of that anymore. Our products, our manufacturing, if manufacturing has kind of diminished a great deal. Our middle class has changed a lot, and um, I guess Christianity and Christian is kind of that's kind of faded as kind of the core beliefs of everybody. Um, so there's a lot of things that have been going on that have changed, and that group felt like America was slipping away. And they saw Democrats, and I mean, the Tea Party was started after Obama became president, and they saw that kind of change and that movement and all the things of heading in that direction as being uncomfortable and kind of the end of America. And I went to these presentations with Republicans and Tea Party people that were talking about, the life of an empire is typically 240, 250 years. And it starts to fade and everything gets weaker. And they kind of saw that the end of the American empire, all associated with, I think it was more of our political, but more our cultural and social change, and the way that we looked at things. And they still see that. I think that's kind of the one thing, the part that led to Trump being elected back in 2016 was that core group was pushing those elements. But I think a lot of people went along because they just didn't feel right about America, anyways. And now here we are in 2024 with Trump trying to make the comeback, and with this Project 2025 stuff and all those things on the horizon. It's kind of that. I think it really goes back to their concerns about Kamala being president, goes back to, and they're in attaching that to America is going to be destroyed, is all attaching to this change, this cultural change, and all these things that are going on. They've been talking about, the political commentators and social commentators have been talking about forever that as America becomes, blacker and browner, that Republicans are going to have more trouble winning elections because those groups, black and brown groups, tend to align more with democratic ideals and those sorts of things. You pile on with, in their perspective, with the gay marriage thing going through 2015, I think that was. And they see this kind of as a decimation of American culture as they know it. And they feel like we're at a tipping point. They were pressed to feel with that 240, 250 year time limit on empires. They were feeling that America is at that tipping point, and things are so different now. Like I mentioned, between myself and my daughters, who are 30 years younger than me, that it's so different that it feels like it's all slipping away. So I hope I've done a fair job of capturing why they see somebody like Kamala as an existential threat, because it's the finish of that long pathway away from the America that they knew and were comfortable with. Um, on the Democrat side, when they, or the left side, when they look at Trump, their concerns originate out of Project 2025, out of January 6th, 2021. And this whole look at the kind of undoing of democracy as we know it, the attempt to take away the vote. Um, Essentially, it's kind of a king-making process that we're looking at, and even Trump has made comments to his in his travels about this is the last time you'll ever have to vote. I believe he told to a group of Christian or evangelicals, um, talking about Project 2025 will go in and making a stronger presidency. He's already largely inoculated himself from or immunized himself from prosecution. Um, so, I think from the Democrat or the opposition view of why Trump is an existential threat to America, or at least American democracy, is because he doesn't seem to adhere to constitutional norms. and doesn't and in the way he's intends to operate, or they believe will operate going forward, is indeed a threat to even kind of our constitutional way of government, because a lot of those provisions are about a lot of the things that are proposed in Project 2025 and some of the things that Trump has hinted at are in opposition to constitutional principles, and in a lot of ways I think take us back to kind of that kingmaker sort of mentality, or the king who 250 years ago Americans stood up and fought against for their freedom and independence from that. And now it seems to some on the left side, or on certain viewers that of this and analyzers of the situation, we're coming back to it. So I just wanted to lay that out there as kind of a backdrop for everybody. I mean, in future episodes, and of course as we get closer to the election, there'll be more talk about nuts and bolts around immigration, tax policy, and how to rebuild America in a better way, and how we deal with a lot of what I see as economic unfairness, how we get people meld a little when it comes to our immigrant group, and figure out just how many immigrants we really want. A lot of those issues I think we can talk about in going forward, but for this moment, kind of as both of these campaigns start gearing up for the final 60, 70 days here before the election, I want to take a look back at why does everybody look at the other as this existential threat? So without further ado, kind of laying that out there, I'd like to bring in another perspective. My producer, Rich. Rich, welcome aboard. How are you today?
I am here.
Great. So, Rich, we chatted.
Here for the most important podcast of our lives.
Thank you.
The most important episode.
The most important episode. Well, it's kind of foundational, but to a lot of things. I think it's maybe not the most interesting. I hesitate at talking about these things because sometimes it reminds me of sitting in some of these cerebral discussions that I'm like trying to extract.
I will admit that when you sent me the topic, I got a little, here we go. Someone's going to be mad. No matter what we say, someone's going to be mad.
Yep.
What I will start by saying, I think that your opening statement was great. I will say that I think you broke down both perspectives quite well. I thought that I don't think neither one came across with a bias. They were very spot on why this group's afraid of this group and why that group's afraid of that group. I think that I think it was fair. I think it was accurate. I think you had a lot of little backstory to it. And I think if I was trying to explain to someone those positions, I think that was a very concise argument for both sides.
Thanks. Yeah. You're probably just saying that because you're my friend, but no, I take it seriously. And also,
I get triggered easily by when people say certain things. I admit it. And when I got to get on the phone, I get on the Insta or on the X, or Twitter, because I like to piss off Elon, so I call it Twitter.
And we should,
just to make him mad. I know he gets mad that Rich does that, but no. But I normally I tend to, like, if I'm sitting here in this chair on another pod, that sometimes I want to just like jump out of my seat. And no, and so really no. Back, I think you had a nice take on it. I think. And I made the joke about this is the most important elections of our lives. And you could argue, both sides could argue, that this one is an important one. If I was on, again, for anyone who's maybe seeing this for this time, I grew up as a Republican. I was a member of I was a Reagan Republican when I was in high school. When I joined I only got to vote from, I think, the second time. First time would have been too early. I voted some Republicans. I voted for some, but I haven't been a member of a party. I'm a registered independent, so I don't get to vote in any primaries for the most part. For probably 10 years now, I haven't been a member of a party. So I do tend to say we sometimes when I think, because I think I am. So I guess I'm a government conservative in the sense that I want small government. I want to be fiscally responsible. uh, government. I want to not overspend. But I'm also, because I was a public high school teacher for 31 years, and I see society. I see some of the problems. I worked in inner city. I live in a city with economic hardship. I've had very, very diverse students. Of you name it, I had it. I mean, if you name any trend, anything, I had one of those, and I taught one of those, and I had one of these, and I've met those people from this country and with this perspective. There isn't one that you could name that I don't think I've met in terms of every trend. You know, and I have tremendous empathy for everyone in that respect. Like sometimes I didn't understand the mindset of some of the things that came across my classroom, but I always tried to respect it. And that's kind of the difference, I think, between one party and the other is the lack of empathy by my friends on the right. That's my problem. That's why I think people are very motivated on the left right now because they don't get a sense of any empathy from the right.
Yeah. Whenever that word comes up in connection with political stuff, my brain immediately goes back to it was one of Bill Maher's episodes years ago where he talks about kind of was talking about the difference between Republicans
Right.
and Democrats and things like that. And one of the things he mentioned, what he said was that the Republicans lack the empathy gene. And he did
Well, if you remember, right?
somebody
I'm
go
sorry.
look,
Yeah, go
Google
ahead.
it, go look for it on YouTube.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's out there.
Well,
Um,
was it George Bush Sr. or George Bush Jr. that did the compassionate conservative thing when they was running? You remember which one was the compassionate conservative?
it was Senior, I
It was Senior.
believe. I
It
believe
might
it
have
was.
been, yeah. But either way, like
Yeah.
they recognized the Bushes recognized, and that administration recognized. I do whether you like George Bush Jr. or not, the second W. Uh, I don't think he's the monster that a lot of people make him out to be. If he
Mhm.
was, he certainly regrets it based on some of his actions since his presidency.
Right.
And I don't, but I do think he really did believe in the American dream, and I think he was a. I do think that he may obviously made a ton of ridiculous choices, which will have to haunt him and his legacy. Decisions that he made that were wrong or bad information or manipulated by his people or big business or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But I don't think he was a terrible person.
No.
There's a lot worse presidents and like that I think were terrible people. And I do
I
think that
agree.
I think his
Yeah.
presidency would have been very different. I think he would have had a much different presidency if it wasn't for 9/11. You
Yeah,
know,
I think I think you're right. I think he was well intentioned. Um, maybe just didn't do the best job at it,
I
but
don't
I
think
think
he
he was
could.
well
I
intentioned.
can't imagine being the president during that. Like I think that was like that's you got to go back to like FDR to think of somebody who had to be president. And obviously FDR was up to the task, and maybe he wasn't up to the task, but I think he did the best he could. And I don't think anybody. It's easy to do hindsight. So I mean I don't think that this batch of Republicans in general have any empathy. I just think they're only concerned about preserving what they believe to be what the status quo should be. That's, I think, my concern with the current Republican.
Yeah, and for
With
me, along the lines of being you know, um, a Democrat for lifelong or whatever, but I'm still kind of a centrist, and I am an old person, so I certainly do remember. Um, there is stuff that makes me uncomfortable too. I mean, not in the sense that I'm like, oh my god, but
right,
obviously not that extreme. But we got used to, you and I grew up in the same place, and we were a fairly homogenous community. There wasn't a
right.
great, we weren't well to do, and there wasn't too many people among us who were, and we didn't mix with too many people who were, and it was a very middle class to lower middle class,
Yeah,
upbringing.
yeah,
Most people were, quite admittedly in our neighborhoods, most people were white.
yeah.
We had, we both of us knew black people and had black friends and things like that, but it was pretty white, and there wasn't
Yeah.
much Asian activity either or presence in our
No,
neighborhood.
not yet. I mean,
Not until
um,
later, but
Yeah.
So I mean, and most people were some form of Christian, and we had a
Yeah.
high density of Polish, Irish, and Italian, which made almost
Yeah.
everybody a Catholic.
And we didn't know too much about, like, we kind of suspected the sexuality of some of our friends, and they probably got ribbed for it. And we said words that you don't say anymore. And
Right.
we there were a lot of inappropriate things. I tell my kids, you could go to the bookstore and you could buy a joke about Italian jokes, like Polish jokes. You could buy a book, and it was like, and all the
Right.
Polish jokes were the exact same joke,
Right.
because Polish people were stupid. Like, that was the joke. Irish people were drunks. Italians were dagos. But they were like, you could go to the store. You couldn't sell those books now in any bookstore. Like, nobody would carry those books now. But it was like a different time. And if we happen to have a friend that we thought was gay, the jokes and the terrible things that people would say. I mean, I cringe at some of the jokes and the words that we used back then that
Mhm.
unfortunately in some cultures still use. So I mean, so I'm glad that I moved a little bit, maybe more to the left in terms of my sensitivities a little bit. I mean, you make the occasional Italian joke, sure, go for it. But I mean, I think it was just all over our society. Like, comedians would get up there and just do jokes about that.
Yeah.
Um,
And
so I mean,
it's hard, to you know to I think we're hypersensitive to all those things.
without a doubt,
I think
without a doubt.
while we were too loose then, I think the pendulum has swung, and I guess I would agree with my some I guess I assume it's more of a right wing thing that we've kind of lost that, and we're a little bit too sensitive to things, and all that stuff, and the everybody
Yeah,
gets a
there's
trophy stuff, and
right.
I'm probably out there as being somebody who, yeah, I don't think that transgender, those who switch from a boy to a girl, should probably be in sports competitions against girls. There's a I can I mean, we
The
spent a lot of
problem
time in
is,
the
right,
70s and 80s trying to get rid of
right.
East German women swimmers and track athletes who were way pumped up on on testosterone.
Right.
So I
Yeah,
don't know why it makes
there
any
are
less sense
definite
today.
concerns. There are definite concerns, and I think there's extremists all the time. But they also, the thing that, and again, I was a coach, high school coach. I coached track, and Connecticut had an athlete that they allowed to run in a male transitional athlete that was transitioning to female to run with the women,
Hmm.
and I did the research on his time, and he was a talented sprinter. And I guess I will recognize that person decided to identify as a female, so I should say she. That person wanted to run, and that state allowed that, and that person's times would have put them like 50th or 60th at the time in that state, if that person had run with the men. Running with the women, that person's time made them the fastest person in the state. And, that's wrong, because the girls that chose to run, the girl that should have won, there was no way that person was going to beat that person. That's an unfair advantage. But at the end of the day, if I researched the girl that came in second, she still got a scholarship to run. I did this research. That girl still got her scholarship, and she still got to go to the college that she wanted to. Maybe she didn't get the gold medal. She got the second level highest medal, but she also still got all the perks because she was that good. And she
Yeah.
did get, so was she really damaged by that one moment because of that one athlete? I think that other athlete is going to deal with a lot more crap for the rest of their lives because they were that athlete. So yes, I think that Connecticut specifically got that case wrong, but it was also very early in that process. And I do feel like we're getting to the point where that will be defined better, that, they're going to have to say, it's not fair. You can't compete in that sport, because of the unfair advantage. So,
Yeah.
it's the same thing, but we used to go the other way, where we used to they wouldn't let women wrestle if they wanted to with the boys. And they would say, well, you can be like, so Title IX came out and said, okay, you have to have a comparable sport then. if you don't have a comparable sport, like we have girls basketball, boys volleyball, boys swim, cross country for girls and boys, golf, boys and girls. We have all those things. But if there's no equivalent offering, then you have to let them play that sport. So if a girl wants to go out for football and they say, well, you can't, then she'll say, well, what sport am I allowed to do? They'll say cheerleading. That's not the same sport. So if I had a daughter and she wanted to play football, I would take the district to court if they said no and say, you cannot provide an equivalent sport. I'm not saying she has to start, but she should be allowed to try out for the team. And if she can't make the team, great, but she should be allowed to try. Like same thing with wrestling. They had to allow in New York State female wrestlers because there are no female wrestling teams. So that this is about, it was 15 years ago.
I probably fall on the other side of that argument. I think they're bending over too far to.
If she can get through the tryout process and make the team, and the girl that I know that was a wrestler, she had wrestled her whole life. Her whole family came from wrestlers, and she was a pretty talented wrestler. Now she lost most of the time, but she won a few matches.
I still don't. I don't know. Maybe it's my sick male mind, but something about if it was my daughter, I wouldn't want young boys groping around with my daughter in either of those sports, to be quite honest.
But I mean, if you look at it, and I get that perspective, but I also would be then you could also then extend this argument, and this is the argument that I want to extend it. Again, being a teacher and seeing this, what happens if you have a gay wrestler, a male wrestler that's gay? You could make the argument, well, if he's a gay boy, he can't be on the wrestling team because he only joined the team, because people will make this argument that he joined the team to grope other boys. Like someone will make that stupid argument, and that's not fair. So then where do we cut it off then? Like, so we say a boy turns out that he's gay, can't be on the boys team because he's touching other boys and he's gay. Like that, I could see parents like, well, I don't want that kid wrestling my son because he's just doing it to grope my son. So that's the problem with some of these things. And public education becomes very gray, like a lot of shades of gray. And people think that public education is this black and white kind of thing. And I'm like, it's not, because I can come up and I know of scenarios where that happened. I can tell you of those situations, like where those things happen.
I don't doubt you. I just think we're trying a little bit too hard there to be equal when there's some, my personal preference is, I think it's okay to have some sports that are male sports and some sports that are female sports. And I don't think we need to create some equivalency around it or all the time or make it available. There's some, I can't make the NBA drop the net to 9 feet instead of 10 feet because I'm a short guy. So, you're born that way, and some stuff is kind of just innate. And I think those lines are okay. I don't think I would extend it, like you said, into sexual preference, but I wouldn't.
I'm just always worried.
And this is a federal government. You mentioned Title IX, so kind of bringing it back.
So title and the problem with
that's
like I know older guys
rule that applies nationally, and it's forcing it's been forced into that kind of stretching it a little bit further into a zone that many conservatives, and actually I'm a little bit uncomfortable with some of the zones that they've gone into with those things. I would prefer there not be there. I don't consider it an existential threat. And I just, sometimes I sit there and just question, well, is this kind of just the change of society? Is this kind of how everything's changing or that sort of thing? I think there's just a little bit of perception that the government's kind of forcing it in those circumstances. And that's kind of where, in that sense, I can understand the conservative right-wing perspective on that. And to a certain extent, I agree with it. But
I think my problem is that I think this one issue gets used like happens every second on every team and every school, and it's not. These are small, simple cases that occasionally come up that really the president has nothing to do with. The congressman has nothing to do with it. These are all state level things that the New York State Public High School Association has to figure out. And then the same thing, you're in Florida. So whatever the Florida High School Public Sports Association has to figure out, he uses that. And that's the argument that comes through. But then he's already talking about, he's looking at possibly using a federal ban of contraception. Well, okay, what happened to a states' right thing? Like the inconsistencies, and I'm not saying the left is consistent either, but like that is it's they use it whenever they want. The same thing like my body, my choice was a big thing where they don't have to take vaccines, but then 2 seconds later, well, a woman doesn't have that right. Like that's to me, and that's why I tend to push myself more to the left because of the inconsistency of that crap. Like they're using it for that agenda. And I know the left uses it for that agenda too, but I feel that on the right, it's much more about a power position over the rights of individuals is why the left is pushing it from their side, in my personal opinion. It's much more about because the Make America Great concept to me is trying to push back to an area where a lot of people in this country wouldn't think that America was so great at that time. And that's where I'm a woman trying to get a job in what's the cutoff for where women could own a business and actually like have a bank account? Like it's not that long ago. It's no fault divorce, which is one of the things in Project 2025. Like give me a break. Like there's a lot of things and he can try to distance himself left and right from it, but his VP candidate signed the friggin' forward of the book. These are all people that worked for him. I don't believe for a second that he doesn't plan to implement a major portion of that. And there are things in Project 25 that I don't have a problem with, but there's too many scary things that make me very, very nervous.
Yeah. I mean, and the number one scary thing is giving the executive president that much, it's kingmaking. And giving them that much authority because, well, what if there really is another election and the next president is some, and this is a question for the people on the right. Well, what if there is another election and actually the next person on the right decides something, decides to use that power in the total opposite way and force down everybody's throat stuff that you don't like. And that in and of itself, that is the risk for everybody of going down this pathway. And I agree. I kind of, having been a practicing lawyer for many years before, I always remember there's this one, I think it was Justice Potter Stewart who was the one giving credit for this statement where he talked about the Constitution as a living, breathing document. And that basically means that it's a guide and it changes, and the interpretations of that document and those principles change as time changes, as the culture changes, as the country changes. And in opposition to that, most of the Republicans belong to a federalist group, like most of the Supreme Court justices are in this group of federalists who believe in the original intent of that, and even to such point as it's just two different versions of the same, and they almost try to capture the culture and the things that were going on at that time and say that's what was meant by the Constitution and that's when we have to follow it. And going to your point, when it's not convenient to them now, when it's not working out, they want to go beyond they want to change it and undo following the Constitution because it just ain't working for them. And there's a piece that was put out by one of Trump's former friends, Scaramucci, talking about that very thing. Not the Constitution being a living, breathing document, but coming to the conclusion that this Project 2025 and all this stuff is really about throwing out the Constitution. And
I mean,
and it's now it's because the living, breathing document breathed rights to people and gave rights to people and transformed those fundamental rights in such a different way that the right wing disagreed with it culturally. they didn't think it was appropriate. They're not ready for it. And it's change that they don't want. And that's why they see this as an existential threat, this election, because if all those immigrants and all those people who are becoming citizens come in, and if they tend to be different and gay and black and brown and think more towards the liberal side.
The maintenance jobs in a plant in Detroit were being done by union people. And that led to other problems, that cars got really expensive and they couldn't compete with the Japanese cars that were coming over and all that stuff, which led to, in many ways, a lot of the unions. But as unions got smaller in this country, and corporate stuff went up, suddenly now it was easier for legal immigrants to get into this country and for companies to allow that. And it's funny because that's kind of what the Republicans wanted. The Republicans wanted to get rid of unions so that, corporations could make more money. And now they're making all this money. And then they're like, oh, but what are we going to do about all these immigrants? Like, these corporations that are hiring these things are the same people that are making large financial donations to Trump and other Republican candidates, full well knowing that their companies hire illegal immigrants. Like, go to Nevada, go to Las Vegas, and talk to the people that are doing the cleaning in those hotels. And I guarantee you there is a lot of violations of that. I have friends that worked in those hotels and they turned a blind eye because management said it was fine. And and then those devaluing of those positions, yes, that brought down things like, and it did have damage to some societies, some positions in this country. I agree with that. I do agree with that. There are issues at the border, but I don't want to see the federal government. I don't want to see the military being used on American soil to escort, to break down doors and start bringing people to the border, and then they're not going to be able
But if they do, can they learn how to do it with a German accent? I just think it would be so appropriate.
Right. And then a couple of weeks ago the Trump administration said, well, we're going to use local police to do it. And I'm like, wait, what? Some border city is going to, in their budget, so in other words, he's saying that we're going to export all these illegal immigrants, but we're not going to actually pay for it. We'll add it again to the other small. This is what's the difference between what the small town sheriff was supposed to do already? Like, he can't do it now. And I know what's going to happen, unfortunately, is that we're going to need a place to store them before because we're not going to just put them on a plane or a bus. We're going to buy some fence from Home Depot, and we're going to build some things that are going to look a lot like Stalag 17.
You don't understand, Rich. There are corporate prison companies.
Oh, yep.
And they are ones that literally, I know this, they house immigrants, and they do those things, and they're paid by that, and they're donating to campaigns.
Yeah.
And
have you ever seen The Boys? Have you watched The Boys at all?
No, I've not. What's that?
So it's really funny because they do an analogy of superheroes and stuff on that show. And there's big corporations that build prisons in that show that who they're planning on housing in those prisons. So there's a lot of Boys references that it's a very left. People thought it was a very right show, and they were really funny because they didn't pay attention. But the show leans heavily to the left with superheroes and Homelander is very much very MAGA, and there's a lot of subtle. It used to be very subtle. Now it's just in your face in terms of that creator's perspective, using superheroes as an analogy, as it were. So it's an interesting show, but they went heavy on the corporations that own prisons.
Yeah, there's so many different sides to this thing, but again, it kind of has gotten all in everybody's heads about these things, and I guess.
What's your biggest concern for a Trump presidency, and then what's your biggest concern for a Harris presidency?
Let's see.
To be fair,
Trump presidency is that he goes in and does some of the things that he wants, and I think that any of those. I don't know which single item he would do, but I think, last time he didn't get through really the things that he wanted to do. He did limit, put kids in cages and stuff, and did stuff like that to deter border entries. And then, COVID kind of helped with border control, because then you could use
Right.
another law, Title 42, to exclude people on that. So that
Right.
really helped. And a lot of this undoing of the border was when, Biden's group wasn't going to put kids in cages. And also when that Title 42 thing expired, which was the COVID emergency, there was that pent up demand where everybody kind of rushed across the border. So, but I don't know if there's anything around. I mean, it's just, if you took the immigration thing, if you really want to try to round up these people, it's going to be, there's no way you can do that without an incredible expense. There's no way you can do I mean, even a small portion of it. I suspect it's going to fail, because they're not, they're not really going to do it, or they're just going to have to
Right.
give up on it, because it's just not going to work. But
Well, it's kind of like the wall. It's kind of like the wall. I don't think he ever thought the wall was going to get built, but he wanted to say he wanted to build the wall, and he said Mexico was going to pay for it, and obviously they didn't.
right. So
But it was like
I
it's the
guess at
same
the
thing with
end
the
of it,
tariffs. The tariffs are the same thing.
ripping apart, as he rips
Yeah.
apart the government, that he also figures out a way to undo. I think in a few years of damage, I think if he undoes that stuff, that can be repaired. What I don't know repairs is if he does a Jinping Xi, or whatever his name is, from China, the president of China, Xi, if he declares himself, okay, I'm the ruler forever, and there's there's nothing anybody else needs to talk about anymore. If he undoes the next election, that is my biggest concern with him. I think if he does a quarter of the shit that he wants to do, the economy is going to go down the toilet. People are going to be unhappy. It's going to suck, and I think
Yeah.
it'll probably he
That
probably won't be around. So the biggest concern is
right.
that he does enough to dismantle the system such that we can't have another election in 2028. That would be my biggest concern.
Right.
As for Harris' biggest concern, I guess it'd probably be that she tries to bend this arc, way back in favor of some of those other things, gets kind of sidetracked on some of these other far left items, because I think it's not giving into the right, but it's giving credence to a group of people who have certain beliefs. And I think that she shouldn't wade too far into those areas and expand on some of those liberal leaning policies and ways of doing things. I think she should do that cautiously, especially in a first term, because if she does it,
here's my take on the Harris stuff. So I want to be fair to say, like, it's funny because, to be honest, out of the two people on the ticket, I think the vice presidential candidate is far more liberal than she is. I think she's actually relatively, I think she's a lot of far left liberals are not super fond of Harris because something as simple as at the convention.
Well, I was answering
they didn't allow a pro-Palestinian person to speak.
Right.
There was a lot of shit that went down with that, blah, 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 blah. And they were actually going to come out, the prepared speech was going to come out and say a couple things and then endorse Harris. But they said, no, we're not going to do it. I feel like our friend from Minnesota is actually far more liberal than she is. I think she is a little bit more, she is in the vein politically, in my mind, because she kind of understands she needs to be. She's trying to run relatively close to the center, like Clinton did, like Obama did. And I think that she's a relatively Obama's not nearly as liberal as people tried to make him out to be, outside of maybe healthcare. Right. And I don't think that the rest of the world views international like universal healthcare as that liberal of a thing, because it's like people have to have healthcare, and it never really was about getting rid of. Hillary Clinton wanted to go full on, everybody was on the government plan, and I think that's one of the reasons she lost, because people were very concerned that if I liked my independent health or whatever I happen to have, that they were going to take it away and make me by the government plan, where Obama never planned to do that. I don't think that and I don't think that Harris has any plans to mess with the status quo for insurance, except try to get more people insured and get them into, the Obamacare program, so more people have insurance.
Yeah, just to explain
there is no talk about taking away my private insurance.
Right. I'm not sure if she would lean, do things that are far on the left either. But I say partly that it's my concern is because I think that's what's worse for the country overall, because it'll extend this debate. I think a lot of the Trump thing is unique to him. I don't think any of his sons can carry the cross. I don't think that Vance can carry the ball forward. I don't think that any of them can pick up for him. He's a one in a time,
right,
once in a lifetime character for them.
Right.
And
that's a really good point.
It can't be replicated. And I think that if you go in and you start slapping everybody around and you start putting in these progressive things, I think that movement, if the Democrats want to extend kind of, Pax Americana here, a little bit of peace going forward, I think you don't want to push back on that group. I think you want to allow that group the time to kind of meld back into and follow the change and let it kind of sink in and let it be accepted. You don't go in and kind of, it's like putting up bulletin board material before the big game.
Right.
Don't go in when you won and dance around on the other team's emblem and kind of pull it that far. And it's also showing respect that she's the president of the entire country, not just the ones that voted for her. And I think you have to respect their opinions, even if they're not what you agree with, and do things according to, not governed by public opinion, but take that into consideration when you're moving things forward.
There's a lot of things that if Trump wins, he will try to do. Some of them he'll be able to do some of it because he will have some ability to restructure some things in the federal government. But I don't think he'll be able to pass too much because I don't think he's going to end up having both House and Senate. He may not have either. A lot of the Senate races that I traditionally thought were well in hand seem to be there's a potential for them to go to a Democrat. At least by the research that I've been doing, looking at some things. So I do feel like that's a limitation. And I want to make a point that I agree with you on this. I don't think Donald Trump is that healthy to begin with. And he's an older man and he won't last forever. It's not like the leader of China that is 45 and China stuck with him for 30 years. And in the meantime, they're raising his children to take over for him and all that type of stuff. Like no one's going to there's not enough, even the diehards, there's not enough of them that think that he can't appoint Don Jr., the next president or something like that. So you're right. I do think when Trump dies, I hate that, I don't want to wish the death on anybody, even someone like him. I do think that a lot of this will kind of fade because they won't be able to agree on who carries the mantle.
Yeah.
They will.
There's going to be a
right
for that approach, that way of thinking. There's going to be a power vacuum. He fills a unique role that I don't think can be easily replicated. So,
and the funny thing about it is, and this was an article I read online the other day, I found quite interesting. Everybody's talking about how these corporations are leaving California. They're going to Texas. Okay. And if I'm a liberal, I'm like, good, because guess who's going to Texas now?
Elon Musk.
Corporations are moving to Texas, and most people that are educated that work for those corporations that are moving to big cities, they tend to be Democrats. They're also coming from California, which was mostly Democrats to begin with. So now Texas is willingly opening up their doors to a lot of corporations with educated people that tend to be Democrat. 75% of people with college educations tend to vote Democrat. So you're changing Texas. You are purposely going out of your way to change Texas. And if Texas goes Democrat, there will never be another Republican president ever again because it's just impossible. The numbers don't work. You have to get rid of the Electoral College, which no one's ever going to get. The Electoral College won't go away, at least then I don't think in our lifetimes. So I kind of laugh. I'm like, sure, if I was Democrats, I'd be like, yeah, let's just move as many, because if we can get Austin and Dallas and Houston and what other major cities in Texas, if those, look at why most of the states that tend to be they tend to go Democrat now. Pennsylvania has voted presidency because of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. So if you take 4 or 5 major cities in Texas and the people that are living in those cities and in those suburbs start to vote Democrat, okay.
Well, again, I think we're going to bring this one to a close, but the main point of what we talked about today was really this existential threat thing about America, depending on which side of the battle you're on here, why one side or the other thinks that the other person is kind of like the end of America.
Right.
And I don't know. We'll see what happens. My hope is that neither of them is the end of America.
America is a pretty resilient place, and I want to end on a positive thing. I do feel like that, I don't think that we're going to end up with a dictator. I really don't. I just think there are too many. I don't even think like the Supreme Court would allow it. I think like they would recognize that
they go pretty far, but not that far.
I don't think they would this far and no farther. And I think a lot of this is not because he doesn't want to be a dictator. He just doesn't want to go to jail. And I think a lot of what I don't even know if parts of me believe you could make a case that if they would not have done all these crazy cases against him, maybe he wouldn't have even have run. But it kind of felt he had to. I'm not saying that I know that for sure. Nobody knows that for sure. But you could make an argument that was a mistake by the Democrats to pursue those cases.
Yeah.
Whether it's the Justice Department or not.
Extend the arguments.
Right.
You extended it. You could have just maybe, left it alone. And in reality, when Congress didn't act and impeach him after January 6th, they were the remedy, and the remedy failed if that's what they were looking for. And all this other stuff is, I don't know. It just seems like they're chasing their tails on it. So I agree. I agree with that point. And there
were several times in our lives we've had election nights where like Obama had the Senate, the House, and the presidency. And everybody's like, that's it for the Republicans. And they're like, no, guess what? Because once people got upset and got sick of people, then all of a sudden, guess what? We got Democratic, we had Republicans take over things. And then back when Gingrich was the Speaker of the House, everybody said, oh my God, like this guy, man, we're never going to get a Democratic House ever again. And we've had a ton of Democratic houses back and forth since then. So I don't think this country will continue to move back and forth. We will be a pendulum.
I think even if you got a different Republican, I think it would be different.
I don't think no one's getting excited about a Vance presidency or a Ted Cruz presidency or anybody. There isn't DeSantis was, everybody thought he was the next great thing and he can't handle the room. I don't think he's the worst governor ever. But he doesn't have any charisma on the national side. I don't know how. You live in Florida. I can't speak to Florida.
No, he doesn't have charisma.
But there's I can touch whatever his ability to get what he gets done in Florida, whether you agree with it or not, is localized to Florida. Like it's not going to play in other places. It's just not. And that's the difference. I don't know, like if who's that Republican that Trump, because Trump's not going to annoy anybody because he's too paranoid about his own popularity. So it's not like he's going to this is the next Trump, because he would never do that. He'll never say this is who I love or endorse. He'll never do that. It'll be a fight. It'll be like Game of Thrones.
Yeah. I agree. So, well, that's it for today. I think we're gonna cut that one off. We'll move on. Maybe I think it seems like it's the kind of the way of the world. I think in the next few episodes we'll get down to some individual issues and kind of work on those a little bit.
I like that idea. Yeah,
I think
definitely.
we're going to get into like immigration that, but today was kind of setting that stage for it. Talking about everybody's doomsday kind of outlook on things, if one side or the other side wins, and then let's take a look at the policy and see if, no matter who gets in, what directionally will happen. I think will determine whether or not it actually is a disaster or not. So
I like it.
sounds good. Rich, thanks, buddy. Have a good one. Stay well over there.
Yep.
And I will see everybody next time. Probably at, let's see, today is August 29th, cutting out. We'll probably do a 2 week in 2 weeks. We'll be back. Stay on our bi-weekly schedule, and we'll be having another topic then to be determined. But look, think about economics, maybe taxes, maybe immigration might be on board for that. So for today, thank you for tuning in to TALUS. They're all lying to us. Remember to look at our website for posts, blog posts, and find our podcast. That's lyingtous.com. And also go to our podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and you can find our lovely mugs also doing our podcasts on YouTube, looking for They're All Lying to Us. Again, everybody have a great day. Stay safe out there, stay healthy, and we'll see you in a few weeks. Thanks.